A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps, because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships.
As I've been appreciating the opportunity to expand in the program, that sometimes I have to go inside because I was always looking outside. It was depending on if this happened, that happened, or the other thing happened. And my expectations took me away from my center. And I find a center now in the program. I am so grateful for it. And it makes a world of difference in my joy and happiness. Thank you.
Wow. Well, that's a great insight. How I relate to that is it seemed like there was no other alternative than to be dependent on the environment for support. It's like the idea that I could support myself, it just never showed up in my consciousness. And then all of a sudden I start to read this thing about Bill and I realize, you know what? There's another possibility here. One that can lead to so much more freedom. And that's what you were describing, Mary. You've discovered that freedom. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, let me invite my dear friend and colleague and world traveler and international speaker. And God, we did an incredible presentation in London together. We've got another one coming up, and we're going to be going to Dublin next year, it looks like there. Herb, which will be
I'm very, so I have my calendar all set. Probably go over early and stay late like we did in London.
I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll turn the meeting over to you tonight. And thanks for.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. And thank you, everybody who supports this meeting and everybody who attends the meeting. Speaking about stepping out of the box, that's really what this chapter is about, lest we forget. It's discovering novel solutions. I was introduced to a man when I was 5 years sober, who said to me in a public forum, after he just knew me for an hour, we were having a conversation. I was there to ask him for help, and he knew that. And he said, Herb, you have a lot of information, but you have no transformation because you have a lot of knowledge that's never been processed through your heart, through your feet. So you have no experience. And I knew that he knew, but I didn't know what he knew. And I knew that I didn't. That began to change. Please hear, this is a process. This isn't like one and done and I made a decision and now I'm going to have an open mind and open heart. Part of it is, because that's the decision part, the free will part, the choice and the willingness part. But it was 10 years later, 10 years into sobriety. And this man who I asked to help me again, another journey through the steps. This is my method of growing in my consciousness. I didn't know that at the time. I just was doing the steps to improve and deepen my awakening. And that was a conscious effort, not really understanding what it all meant, but knowing the words, not the implications. And He suggested that I have an attitude of setting aside. He said, you've been through the steps 3 different times. You go to step studies and book studies, and you've got all this advanced education in a variety of disciplines, and you're an avid reader, and you know, and you've had now the experience of change. He said, I would like you to have a contemplative approach to doing the steps and to have an attitude of setting aside your ideas, your knowledge, and your experience up to this moment. And he said, I know you're willing to do that, because I'm shaking my head. Yeah, I'm all in. He said, but in the final analysis, operate on the step 1 principle that you are actually even powerless to do that. Willingness, but that in fact you really can't set aside your old ideas. You really can't set aside your knowledge. You really can't set aside your experience, because it's embedded in you. And the willingness to do it is an openness that is the beginning. But adopt the attitude of the step 1, that you are powerless actually to do it, and invite the spirit that you've really connected to in a very effective way. I had a daily practice of meditation, etc., etc. He said, invite that spirit to open your mind, to open your heart, to release you from your knowledge, to release you from experience. And here's what he said. I'd never heard it before. And be prepared to be delivered to a place you don't even know exists. Wow. I heard the words. I actually really didn't know what they mean. I do now, and I get actually all choked up 30 years later. That was 1994. When I see the implications of what happened, it was a 2-year process, week by week by week by week. And I adopted a set-aside attitude. Of course, I turned it into a prayer of some kind. And there's lots of different formats for that. Many of you, if you're in a 12-step program and have been exposed to the work that I've done and or Alan's done, you're aware of some of the formal prayers that have been developed. Prayer is not about words, it's about the intention. And the intention here is to set aside. So even if it's not a prayer, it's an attitude. Even though it's not a prayer, it's a positive attitude that there is a mystery here that can be unfolded in some way that I can't even anticipate, and I can't certainly precipitate. Many of the times he said, step out of the box. And I didn't know I was in a box. He said, stretch it. Be ridiculous, be socially unacceptable. Well, in our privacy, not in the public forum, but just really be outrageous in your curiosity, in your willingness to step off the cliff into the abyss. I mean, talks like that. I really didn't know what he was talking about, but I got the spirit of it. Like asking the life force, that life force of the universe, to bring a crowbar and to open up your mind and open up your heart and to detach you from whatever you're invested in that is blocking you from the truth. That was the attitude that I had during this. And he asked me to ask myself questions. The secret to, I believe, transformation is to be presented with really effective questions. Not because there's a right answer or that you get a test and evaluate. No. To help you sort of crack open whatever it is that you're discerning. One of my teachers said, ask the question, and in the milieu of that set-aside attitude and prayer, Allow the asked but unanswered question to percolate, to steep like good tea, just to bubble and percolate for a week or a month even, or whatever, until you're delivered to some awareness or some insight or some instinct or some whisper. It's that openness. It starts with looking at my behavior to get underneath it. I'd already had that experience of seeing my beliefs delusional, seeing my motives corrupt and self-centered, not really evaluating the outcomes as accurately because I put the paintbrush of fantasy on it or rationalization. Not intentionally. I don't intentionally deceive myself, but I unintentionally and most of the time unconsciously deceive myself. It's my default position, dishonesty. Some people's default position is anger. Some people's default position is instinctually fear. It's not mine. I mean, I have them all, and we all have them all, but my dominant default position is dishonesty, camouflage to hide. Lots of comments I can make about that, and I won't. But I need to get underneath, and I know there's more underneath. And it's like having the curtain, I almost said pulling the curtain back, but no, it's like having the curtain pulled back with this attitude, with this effort, with this question, with this holding, and being comfortable with lack of closure. Oh my God, that's torture for me. My daughter says, I have closure issues. I like to bring it to a conclusion. I like to build piles. I like to have endings that satisfy me. One of the things I found to be pandemic is the need to be right, especially among men, to defend themselves. One of the phrases that came out of my work with step 6 and 7, that journey, was to be undefended. And now I feel safe enough to experiment with it. I feel humble enough and want more humility. Careful what you pray for. Meaning the right size, the perspective, or St. Teresa of Avila said, humility is truth. To actually see objective reality as it is, to the best of our ability. This is emotional sobriety, to live in the truth. Really a journey of humility, looking at the truth. What is the truth? Byron Katie in her book, Loving What Is. She just kept, is it true? No, ask again. Is it really true? Is it really true? I mean, it kept asking, getting beyond the surface, getting beyond the second and the third stage. What do I need? What do I want? What do I hope for? How am I fulfilling this in terms of my behavior and the outcomes? To step out of my opinions about what the alternatives are in any box that I have. The stretch concept was embarrassing and uncomfortable. Well, I mean, that's why I hate empty chair. Alan loves it. I hate it because it's a real stretch for me to step out and kind of like play or act or yeah. I need a certain amount of structure and certainty. Certainly to talk with somebody about what's going on. And I trusted this man. I didn't want anything this man had, by the way. It wasn't that he impressed me. I didn't want anything he had. He had never had a job, a real job. He was a trust fund baby. He was overweight. He smoked. So many things that I judged and I resisted until, in fact, there was no other answer, but the Spirit said, work with this man. And I had this insight into unmanageability for the very first time as an experience because of this set-aside attitude, approaching the same material in the big book, but seeing it from a very, very different angle. There was light on it now, and the words just broke open, and the meaning and the experience came out of those words. And for the very first time, I came to steps 2 and 3. I mean, I was a monk for 7 years. 7 years of silence. And yet at 10 years of sobriety and 53 years of age or whatever it is, I saw that my knowledge and my beliefs and my traditions were the very impediment to my relationship with the mystery. Because I was released from all of that background baggage and noise and delivered to a place of a vibrant and personal relationship. I was willing to be taken to a place I didn't even know existed, and I was delivered. In a big surprise way, I found myself as a practicing agnostic at 10 years of sobriety. And I was able to make those decisions and choices that step two invite us to in the most authentic way and know that it was real, a faith decision based on nothing but a choice, and a hope decision based on nothing but a desire to have a relationship. As a result of that, coming to grips with the principles of reality. And one of the benefits of the work we do in emotional sobriety and the work that's been done by this panel, looking at the steps again from emotional sobriety, looking at the self-esteem, Brandon's book on self-esteem, and now looking at Alan's book on emotional sobriety, has broadened and deepened all of those experiences because we're open to having these discussions. I'm open to hearing the panelists in their interpretation and their presentation. I'm open to hearing the participants and their questions and their experiences. And I've changed just in the time that I've been part of this panel, let alone the prior work that I've done. Having an open mind and open heart and the willingness to be gifted it. I'm not controlling it. I get into the rocket. I get into the rocket, and the rocket's got its own trajectory. It's going to take me where the rocket's going to go. I have a few little knobs for some manipulation, but the rocket's going to take me where the rocket's going to go. And I'm okay with that. Thanks.
Okay. Let me get myself in here with you, Herb. Find Roger. There he is. There he is, I should say. There's oh, wait a minute here.
I can play.
Ah, you can look at that Texas hat, huh?
That hat has a good beating.
That hat,
That hat has
that
got
hat's been
stories to
out on the
tell.
range. That hat has been
Yeah.
out on the range.
Stories to tell. Yeah.
So does it really? I'd like to hear one of them.
I got to work on my ventriloquism, and then I'll do it. Yeah.
All right, next time the hat will talk to us. That's great.
All right. All right.
And those of us that use acid will start having a flashback.
Hmm.
I used to have walls talk to me, Thom.
Lots of things talk to us.
They do. I do. Well, let's get serious. I'm in a goofy mood tonight for some reason. I don't know. I think I'm overtired.
Let's get serious. Okay.
Oh God. Tom's out of here. Oh my God. It's like kryptonite for Superman, right?
Yeah, it's like,
He's out of
yeah. Come on.
He's out of the room. God, I see his powers weakening already. Oh my God. Well, listen, Herb, I always love how you relate this back to your personal experience. And that's like you've told us many, many times. That's the basis for, what you do and what you teach and what you share with us. And it's always relevant because in many ways, what he was introducing you to was a different way of thinking about your life, a novel solution to your problem. He had met you with an idea that you couldn't imagine because we don't know what we don't know. and he was able to bring it to you in a way that you were able to hear. And I think that's the important part, right? Is the experience. You were ready to be influenced by someone. We call it accessibility, availability. You were available for new information. And like you said, man, there's a lot of things that I've done, you've done, that a lot of people do to block themselves from that. Roger tried to articulate some of that before in terms of what creates a rigidity, what creates a rigidity to our response to our situation. In psychology, they call it a stimulus-bound response, that you're so locked into responding to the stimulus as it is, you can't respond in a novel way to it, so that you're stuck with how you've always dealt with that situation. You've heard me refer to it before as being fixed in our personality, right? Rigidity is another synonym that we could use for it. And, I think we've been discussing, and we understand for a lot of different reasons, is our rigidity is an attempt to control ourselves, to control our environment, so to control our experience. And what you were talking about that was so different than that was being willing to surrender yourself to the experience. See, instead of controlling it, yes, we do have those little knobs that can maybe move it one way or the other within a certain parameter. But I know for me, that surrendering to my experience was a novel experience in recovery. The only time I'd surrender to my experience was when I was high or on, alcohol. Then I could let go of all of the other stuff I was doing to try to control everything. And that's where I felt freedom. I often said, man, that I really believe my drinking and using Bill talks about it, or Jung talked about it as a small s, right? Looking for the big S, right? And I can see that what I was looking for was a path to freedom, but I found a pseudo freedom in my use of alcohol and drugs. It was only induced by the chemical. It wasn't a result of a byproduct of the way I was living. And so it's really an incredible journey. Like you said, Herb, 30 years ago, you couldn't have imagined your life being what it is today. I'm coming up on 53 years here shortly. I couldn't imagine 53 years at that 19-year-old Vietnam vet that I'd be, experiencing what I'm experiencing, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, it's the whole thing. We prize happiness, but there's an incredible value to the whole range of experience in our life, even though I go into it sometimes kicking and screaming, but I appreciate a lot what you said tonight, and it reminded me of a lot of things. So I will turn it over to the most serious one of us, and that is Thom Rutledge, who will,
All right.
I'm sure, bring a very stoic attitude about this whole topic.
I will. It's, yeah, I always want to say something about what you just said, Alan, is that the idea of the pseudo freedom, or it's always good to remind myself, but be reminded that even in our craziest, dumbest, shittiest efforts, there's a positive intent behind it. We're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to get something done. And it's like when you talk about the freedom and it not being real freedom, I thought about is like, I often talk about my should monster, my self-condemnation. And, what I figured out with hindsight is that basically with my drinking, I could hold my alcohol. The should monster couldn't. I mean, I would drink a little bit. He would pass out. And then I would go out and have a great time without him bothering me anymore. And it was wonderful. It's like, I remember the first time I told somebody that, they said, well, who woke up first in the morning? And it's like, of course, yeah, when I wake up, he's already in the middle of a sentence sitting on the side of my bed telling me what a motherfucking idiot I am, and it's like going on and on and on. But okay, that's a good segue to Herb. Herb, every time you speak, I think every time, no, every time except for 3 times probably. Um, I have I associate you. You bring up in me. You bring up in me just memories of. You tell you something about your life, and I go. I have some kind of connection to a memory of mine of what I did. Like for instance, tonight, it was like when you talked about like you were talking about not judging others, and I remember early in my recovery, I'm by the way, I'm a real good judger. I can judge with the best of them. And I remember I was talking to my sponsor and when I was choosing to tell him about this guy in the meeting that I was just saying, what a what a bozo I thought he was, and and but I had a problem. By the way, I said, idiot, he wears t-shirts and suspenders, and I go like, okay, well here we are in 2024. It's like me too, but the problem I had is this bozo. He said something in a meeting one time that was I needed it exactly. I mean, it was one of those on the money things that where somebody speaks and you go like, that's coming right for me. But I was talking to my sponsor and I was still leading with the judgment and I don't remember his exact words, but basically the sponsor did, it stuck with me was he said, you got a choice. He said, you can judge. And he was truly okay with that. He was like, you can judge or you can receive the wisdom, but you can't do both. So it was like, yeah. So you brought that back up for me, Herb. I remember that on a regular basis, because my judging guy in there, he's always active, and I just always want to be sure I don't punctuate with him. So here's what I want to say. I think this is kind of what I just want to emphasize in terms of the theme of novel solutions. It's like mostly that we are, or we need to be, I need to be always looking for opportunities, not just taking advantage of certain situations, but looking for opportunities to step into the unfamiliar and even to the alien, to the scary shit, and I'm working on, I think I've made some good progress with this, working on the idea of reframing that so that looking for those opportunities to be scared, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, all that kind of stuff. I really do have a new frame for that, which is this is going to be interesting. This is going to be good for me to do. And so, and I think that's where, I mean, that's the general novel solution is that we're pushing past outside of our comfort zone. We're pushing past, what has been safe for us. And I just got to go. I'm just going to repeat some of the things Herb said because these are the things that just I got today. That I think I got it right here, Herb. Not you had a lot of knowledge, but they wasn't processed through your heart or your feet. Right? I love that. It's like it's up here. It's all up here. You always do that thing with your hands, or you do this and that. I just think about that. It's like the other one is, of course, I love wisdom that rhymes. So it's like you have information but not transformation. That really resonated with me. And the last thing was basically my favorite part is you were going to be delivered to a place that you do not know exists. And I mean, I challenge everyone in this room, in this Zoom room, who's got any experience with recovery at all. And sometimes we can lose sight of this, but we've all done that. We all there are things that we are experiencing or we do experience in our lives now that sometime in the past, we had no clue that it was even possible. And it's I think I've told about one client of mine that came up with a wonderful idea, and she continues to do it. She keeps a list of impossibles. What she does is she writes, and she's got a very strict rule. The only things that go on this list are things that she actually has done, has accomplished, that she once thought was impossible. Which so in other words, if she thought it was hard, but she thought it was possible, that doesn't go on the list. And if it's a good, if I were to suggest something to her and she thinks that's a good idea, but it would be difficult, she doesn't put it on the list unless she actually accomplishes it. And last time I talked to her, she had 82 things on the list, 82 things that she had done that were impossible. So that her thought, I love, and I just like to spread this around for people because it's a wonderful exercise to keep adding to, is every time she hits something that feels like it's impossible, she goes back to her list and reads all the things that she's already done that are impossible. And that's novel to me. So that's what I got. Thanks.
Oh, well, Herb, thank you again. You do have a twinkle in your eye. Glad to see it. And I always hear things when you present that have value for me. And for some reason tonight, your emphasis, especially related to novel solutions, on openness. The idea of opening ourselves, which is also, depending on the context and the situation, it can be very exciting and interesting. But as Thom has pointed out a lot, it can also be very anxiety provoking and frightening. But I wanted to point out something else you mentioned when you mentioned how much you hate the Gestalt therapy technique of the empty chair work. See, you have an emphasis on openness, but you also know who you are in certain ways, and you're very accepting of that. And both can be there. You're also very open in many, many ways, even I think compared to when we first met decades ago. I experience you in many ways as so much more open, more at an emotional level and so on. And so I appreciate that. Well, many things about how you present, but those are some of the themes tonight about opening to new possibilities. And when I am able to do that, it's a great experience. So I wanted to say a few more things about the finding novel solutions. Something I like to do with my clients, as you've heard me talk about many times, is to simply use sentence completion work. And it's very interesting to see what can happen. A couple of routes that I wrote down, and Alan has several really good ones, by the way, at the end of this chapter, and a couple of these are quite similar to those. A solution I might try is just that. Sit down and write that out when you're thinking about a specific pattern that you want to change, or a problem that you're encountering with regard to your emotional sobriety or our emotional sobriety. A solution I might try is, and write 6 or 8 endings to that, letting them be spontaneous, unrehearsed, not thought through. As one of my favorite therapists said, trust your unconscious, it knows more than you do. Okay, trust your unconscious, it knows more than you do. Because the way he looked at the unconscious is, it is everything we know that we are not aware of consciously in this moment. We'll think about that for a moment. Everything, not just that we know, but that we've experienced, that we're not consciously in touch with at this moment. Well, in this moment, I'm aware of a pinpoint, not even a pinhead. That's the largest part. A pinpoint, right, of knowledge and experience at every level: emotional, cognitive, physical, somatic, and all that stuff. So, and this technique is a very good way to allow subconscious awareness and possibilities to present themselves. Another one would be, if I tried something different, it might be. If I tried something different, it might be.
Yeah.
And finally, what this situation is asking of me is, I think Alan uses demanding of me in his chapter, and that's fine too. Sometimes reality is absolutely demanding things of us. We can totally ignore it, and I have many times in my life, but that doesn't mean reality wasn't really pointing me toward toward what I needed to do, right? To have a more effective response. But a simple tool like those incomplete sentences can generate a number of ideas about not just how to think about a situation differently, but what to do. And then the only other thing, well, related to that, two other things. One, if you want a powerful shortcut to a novel solution, nothing works like contrary action. And Alan mentioned that last week. And it is like, what would be the opposite of, or at least very different from, what I typically do. I read another comment by that therapist who said, we can pretend anything and master it. What a concept. We can pretend anything. Now, obviously there are limits. I can pretend I can fly by clapping my arms, and it's not going to work very well. But there's a huge range of things, of possibilities. And Thom, when you were talking about dealing with novel situations, that came to me. If what if I pretend I could do that? What if I just make believe I could be more assertive in that situation? What if I just make believe I could be more emotionally open in that situation? What if I pretended to believe? Or what if I pretended I could do that? Maybe I have a lot of capabilities I don't realize I have. So that's the kind of thinking. You also mentioned motivation last week, Herb, and I think it's incredibly important to look at around this issue. To ask ourselves, beginning with simple questions like, why are each of us here tonight? Right? Why are we interested? Why am I interested? And I know why questions have their problems. They can take us way into our heads way too much and end up with a lot of circles with no necessarily satisfactory answers. But another way to say it might be, what is my purpose here? What is my intention here? How do I think emotional sobriety is going to help me in my life? And what's motivating me? Is it the pain that I'm in, which is often the case, for me at least, resulting from my lack of emotional sobriety? Or is it just a desire to grow and change along the lines of that psychological imperative that Alan has talked about? But if we're connected to what we're motivated by, and we can frequently renew our awareness of that motivation, and if that motivation runs deep enough in us, it can allow us to sustain a lot of movement toward emotional sobriety. It can allow us to be resilient in the face of disappointments and setbacks and so on. So being aware of what the meaning of and the motivation of emotional sobriety is to us, where we're coming from toward it, is a very helpful idea to have a handle on. So thanks, guys.
One of the notes that I didn't reflect in my comments was, and thank you everybody for talking about it in terms of practical application, and that is, so how do I experiment with doing that? And that's pretty tried and true pros and con list. I take an 8 by 11, I divide it down, I do pros and cons. I do advantages and disadvantages. I do positive and negative. I do actions and outcomes. But you just introduced me to another extreme, in the sense that I put it extreme opposites. I mean, really stretch with extreme opposites.
Yeah.
And sort of play with it in terms
Be
of
outrageous.
actions. Say it again.
Be outrageous.
Be outrageous, extreme actions and extreme outcomes. I mean, because we're in fantasy here. In some way, it's okay. We enter into the world of ridiculous, even. Yeah. And then what I found very helpful after days, weeks, months, probably some time period, is then read it, the distillation of it, read it out to somebody. There is nothing like saying it out loud to have a whole new experience with the information you've already processed, but you haven't really connected to it until you hear it out loud for the very first time.
Mhm. That's good.
Yeah. The other thing that I really resonated with this, and I do want, and I'll be talking about it more when I'm up to bat next, is this idea of allowing room for our unconscious to influence our consciousness. And it's it's oftentimes, and I can own this, and I see it in so many people. I hate not having a solution. So sometimes I want to force a solution that may be incomplete, that is pressed, or is too compulsive, right? Too driven by needing it to be wrapped up, by needing it to be neatly put on a shelf somewhere. And we talk a lot about living in the pause, but a lot of us think of the pause as only very small pause. But could the pause be overnight? And I remember what Scott Peck said in his book, The Road Less Traveled. God speaks to us through our unconscious while we're sleeping. It's an interesting way to think about it. Now, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to bed on the horns of a dilemma, and I wake up with a fresh perspective about it. No idea how that happened. I mean, sometimes I'll never forget, one of the times I experienced was in this very, very advanced statistical class on analysis of variance. And this guy gave us a problem that I had no idea on how to solve. And I was one of these things. I was a dog with that had a bone, and I wasn't going to let it go. I put 12 hours on this homework assignment in, and I was no closer at the end of that 12 hours to the solution than I was when I started it. And I went to bed just racking my brain, and I slept, and I woke up and I went, oh, that's what I was missing.
Yeah.
I had that moment, that aha moment. And I went to class the next day, and I was one of the 2 students out of a class of 150 that figured it out in terms of where he was going with this thing. And it was not because I consciously got it, but it was something that happened unconsciously for me.
Yep.
It's a very important thing for us, sleep on it.
Right.
All right, Thom, why don't you let me come back in the room, and maybe we have time for 1 or 2 shares, but first, any comments you want to make on this? And how are you feeling, by the way, first?
I'm good. I'm almost collar free. This experience has been one of almost an accelerated maturation process. It's like I went back to having somebody wash my butt, someone feeding me soft foods, and like it's like, ooh, I could sleep on my own without the collar, and I could drive now. Like, it's been a very accelerated maturation process as I got down here.
Good for you. Good for you.
Talk about humility. Talk about setting aside what I think I know. Like all of that come into play here. What I loved was Herb talking about the set aside attitude, and I think I've made the biggest jumps in my emotional sobriety is when I've come to realize that I was wrong about something, right? Like, just like, alcohol was, a little bit obvious, getting hit over the head with, yeah, this isn't working anymore. But then other deeply ingrained ideas that I had about myself and others that that once I was able to accept, like, oh, I might be wrong about them. I might be wrong, especially around the resentments and forgiveness in my story. But there's this like sense of freedom. It's like, oh, what else am I wrong about? Like this is exciting. Like what else do I not know? Right? Because it gives me freedom to be open to possibilities, and it's it's really just loosened things up for me versus the rigidity that you guys have been talking about. So I appreciate all the conversations today. All right, so we do have time for a couple hands, and Kathy just jumped right in. So I'm going to ask you to unmute and add you to the spotlight. Come on in, Kathy.
To me, it seems for me, the biggest key for novel solutions is having real trust and faith in my higher power, because that's what stops me, is fear of the unknown. Am I going to be okay? Is it going to be safe? But if I really am secure in my higher power, then I know I'm always going to be okay no matter what. So that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy.
Well, Thom, why don't we make some announcements and then wrap things up tonight?
Okay, yeah, if there's no one else we're looking to share, we can make some announcements, and we've got a few. First up, I think in order of when it's happening, is Thom has a workshop coming up. Hold on one second, I just want to make sure you guys can unmute if you need to. There you go. Thom has a workshop coming up. It's translating interpersonal to intrapersonal. It's a workshop this Saturday from 10 to noon Central.
Hey, Thom, we're rescheduling that. We had a conflict, and we're going to reschedule. So anybody who's interested in that, go ahead and email me, and I'll put you on the list when we reschedule.
Okay. Do you have a date yet or no?
No, we don't.
Okay. Shoot it to me when you do, and we'll start scheduling that. All right. Let me get the rest of the list here going real quick. We have a workshop coming up, Alan and myself, in July 13th. This is going to be in Doylestown. It's going to be exploring the depth of emotional sobriety, where we trace back some roots and some branches off of people who either influenced Bill Wilson or point in the same direction as Bill and parallel emotional sobriety concepts. And so that I put in the chat earlier. I'll post that again. And we've got a flyer if you're interested. Herb and Alan are going to continue their series for the Mary and Joseph Center. That's a Zoom workshop coming up on July 20th. And, the other one I have further out, actually two further out, is Alan's going to do another trauma workshop, one-day workshop in October. In Doylestown, and Alan returns to the Wilson House at November 22nd, which is, I think, after Thanksgiving this year, isn't it? I'd have to look at the calendar.
Just
but
before, I think, Thom.
Yeah. Okay. But that's coming up in
No, it's before.
Before, the weekend before? Okay, great. And that's going to happen at the Wilson House. That's sold out fairly quickly in the first run that we had. So I'll put all those links in the chat, and you guys can fill in a few details while I cut and paste here.
Well, hey, listen, I want to also say that I put out the flyer today for Alan's in my workshop called the Day of Mindlessness to balance out the excessive mindfulness that some of us have. So of course the workshop doesn't exist because we never get around to actually showing up for doing it. But it's like the flyer is one of my favorites. So it's on the Facebook page.
And what was the other one? The art of not giving a shit or something like that, or
well, no, I didn't do that. No, that was the stuff we were going to do before the pandemic. Was just we were just going to say it was just called stuff that. What was it? Shit that matters. That's what it was. It was just shit that matters. You and I were going to go anywhere and talk to people about shit that matters. It's like
right,
we can still get on the road and do that one now, and I think that'd be good.
That'd be a fun one.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.